All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live. Welcome to another episode of the Mic'd in New Haven podcast, episode 66. An episode I'm really amped up about as the Tales from the Boom Room miniseries continues. I'll introduce my guest in a moment. If you haven't checked out episode 65, the previous episode of the podcast, please do so, as I had the chance to speak with former New York Mets manager Bobby Valentine. Bobby V spoke about his years in New York, especially those 1999 and 2000 seasons, in which he took the Mets on deep playoff runs, including, obviously, that World Series clash against the Yankees, the Subway Series back in the year 2000. So Tales from the Boom Room, you might be wondering what that is. Tales from the Boom Room is a mini-series within the podcast in which I chronicle not just former members of the NYPD, but also former members of the NYPD's Arson and Explosion Squad, as well as the NYPD's Bomb Squad. We had Bill Ryan on, who was in the Arson and Explosion Squad for 13 years out of his 20-year career, and he was great. It was a two-part special. And my next guest is just as interesting. He was in the Bomb Squad. Who is my next guest? Well, he's a man who had one of the most interesting careers a man could have in law enforcement, serving with the New York City Police Department from 1980 to 2000. He retired with the rank of detective second grade with the NYPD's Bomb Squad. A former Marine, he also served as the unit's intelligence coordinator, and it was his work that was widely praised as having helped solve the 1993 terrorist bombing of the World Trade Center. And there's so much more to his life. It's not just that. So much so that in 2019, with the help of a great writer by the name of Jeff Ingber, his book, Rendered Safe, Tales of an NYPD Bomb Tech, was released, and it's available for all to read. Retired NYPD Bomb Squad detective second grade, Don Sadowy, joins me now on the Mike to New Haven podcast. Don, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Mike. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. I'm really excited about this. You and I have been talking a lot off air, and I can't wait for the listeners to hear your amazing stories finally on the air. I made the mistake of not having the book next to me. I have to go get it soon, and I will momentarily so the audience can see it. So first things first, before we get to everything you did with the NYPD and more, obviously, your early years were really interesting. It's kind of similar in terms of, we talked about it off the air, your background and my background. Raised by a single mother, you grew up in the Greenpoint section of Brooklyn. Tell the audience about your early years.
It was pretty humble. We lived in the apartment building above a bar and grill that my grandparents owned and operated. And it was a very successful business from the late 1920s all the way up to about 1968. And the father figures for me were my uncles, in particular my Uncle Alex, who helped raise me. He was a wounded World War II veteran. And I guess the best way to sum it up was I was a very shy, scared, quiet child. And I spoke with a couple of other detectives that grew up in that area, in that era. And the thing that we found commonality with was that we were poor, but we didn't know it. You know, we had a roof over our head. We had food on the table. I had clean clothes to wear. And I witnessed a lot of what went on in the waterfront through the eyes of a child. It almost mirrored the movie with Marlon Brando from the 50s, On the Waterfront.
Yeah.
We had, at any given time, there was a bookie who hung out in the bar, the bosses from the Longshoremen's Union, tugboat captains, owners of the factories in the area. It was like, these were like the quiet movers and shakers of the waterfront. And I would go in and be able to get a little bit of food now and then or something to drink. But you could see my grandfather was holding court at the end of the bar. It was a pretty big place. All the way at the end, if you were just a neighborhood guy, you didn't go down there. That's where people were talking business in private. There was a public phone booth, and nobody was allowed to use it because that was used for the bookie who would get phone calls, and he would make phone calls out, doing the numbers. Longshoremen would come and go. My grandmother and my mother would work the kitchen. Was open from 5:30 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. And my uncles and my grandfather would work the bar. And I was just a very, when I think about it, just a very shy, frightened most of the time, quiet child. So that's really my childhood as I remember it.
It's interesting when you share the boogie detail because that is old school New York right now. Because now, and I don't gamble, I don't really like that stuff. I like to be smart with my money, but when you hear now, I mean, there's these apps and everything's available for everyone to just do it in a mainstream fashion to where, whatever. But back then, I mean, listen, if you fell behind on something, it's not like, whatever, I'll just get them next time. I mean, if you fell behind on something, you might need a new pair of kneecaps after a while.
Well, there was besides the bookie, there was the loan shark.
Yeah.
He would come in once a week, and I never witnessed any violence.
At least.
Well, not that I could see. I was just a little kid, and I
Right.
didn't hang out there. I wasn't allowed to hang out in there. I'd just go in there and, ask my grandfather or my grandmother or my uncle, if I can have a soda or if I can have something to eat, and I would just come and go. I used to collect the beer bottles and the soda bottles with my grandmother's shopping cart and bring them back. And my uncles, I know that they never said anything, but I guess I was a pain in the behind because I came back with a lot of bottles. The regular soda bottles were 2 cents and the big beer bottles the empties were 5 cents. So that's how I got my spending money,
Oh, okay. Yeah, smart. That's
Yeah.
resourceful for sure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what are the things that you talked about in the book? I mean, high school is just, and we talked about it off the air, of course. High school is a really strange time because it's not like middle school where you're young and, to generalize, you're pretty much young and stupid. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know what life's about. High school, you're starting to get a little bit more aware of the world. Maybe you got your driver's license by the time you're 16. Maybe you're working your first job. And, it's difficult in that sense because you're still battling with your body. Maybe you're hitting puberty and things like that. There's just a range of things combining that makes life a bit of a tricky thing to navigate that age. And you went to Brooklyn Automotive, which would play a key role later on in your career with the NYPD's Bomb Squad. But during your time there, I mean, you had to try to get an education while attending school with, violent gang members being your classmates. There was fights all the time. And the exact quote that you have in the book is, "You couldn't walk in certain hallways or take certain stairways or you get the crap beat out of you. I couldn't wait to graduate," end quote. So even in negative environments, you can still learn a lot, however. So what did being in an environment like that teach you, not just about, obviously, automotives and basic education, but also about life?
It taught me very quickly realities. There were gangs out there. They're very violent. You could be stabbed. You could be murdered. You could be beat up very badly. I tried to stay away as much as I could. One time I had to fight back. I carried a tire iron. It rolled up in my coveralls. It's about 1.25 inches forged steel and about 16 inches long. And one day I just had to fight for my life on a stairwell. What was really sad was that I had a history teacher, and all the teachers there were really, they were older people. They were like in their 60s. I'm 16, 17, and he would mark me late every day if I was a minute late coming into that classroom. And I told him in confidence that I was scared for my safety because of these gangs that hung out in the stairwells. He didn't want to hear it and told me if I'm late again, that's it. You're going to fail. You're going to fail for this quarter. I tried going to the administration. They didn't want to know anything. The gangs ran that school at the time. It was horrible. I lived a life in fear. It was really one of the most horrible times of my life. I got no support from the administration, from the teachers. And then, unfortunately, I'm not proud of it, but I had to take the situation in my own hands. And that's when I carried a tire iron. And when I was attacked on the stairwell, I fought for my life. And it's an ugly part of my past. Not proud of it, but it happened. I was called. I went up to the history class. I made it You see, that was another thing. This teacher did not want to hear anything why I took the long way to go upstairs instead of taking the short way, between classes. And I get in this class and my heart's pounding out of my chest. I'm sweating. I'm scared. I just fought 3 guys in a stairwell, 3 or 4 guys. I'm a shy, scared kid. And I'm sitting in the class, and about 10 minutes later, some kid comes up from the office with a note from the dean to have me come immediately down to the principal's office. I came down. I sat on a bench, in this old school, office setting, this big open space on a big, long oak bench from the 1930s. And I'm scared. And I just said to myself, if they call the police and I get arrested, well, so be it. But I'm going to tell the whole world who'll ever listen that I got no help from this administration, these teachers, and they let these gangs rule the school. So I could hear a lot of yelling behind this big oak door with the milk glass, that says principal on it. A lot of yelling going on in there. And the dean comes out, looks at me, gives me a dirty look, and I feel like I'm about to have the axe fall. I guess I'm going to be locked up, whatever. And he goes back in there. There's more yelling. And I think, that was me thinking as a child, a shy child who didn't know anything, shy kid. And in hindsight, as a man today, as an older person, I think they knew about these things. They didn't want to deal with it. They covered it up. And now the stuff hit the fan. And now they were forced to deal with it. So what happened was Dean came out, said something to one of the secretaries, whispered to her. She wrote a note. She smiled at me and she says, go ahead back to class. I never heard another word about this officially from anybody, not from the principal, the dean, or the teachers. And I continued to carry that tire iron. And when I went down into the lunchroom the next day, all the bad guys, they like to intimidate people. I sat with my back against the wall on a bench, with those big picnic style tables in the cafeteria. Very, very old. I mean, the cafeteria, the paint was peeling. Almost nobody bought food down there. The food was awful, to say the least. So I would bring like a bologna sandwich and a bag of chips and a soda. And I sat with my back against the wall. And I could tell these bad guys are like, eyeballing me, and I'm not blinking. I'm looking right back at them. And from that point on, they backed off. I fought back, and I put a hurting on some of these guys. And I guess, I was tired of being the victim. And that's really what it came down to. Not proud of it, but
no, of course not.
It was a matter of survival.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable. I said this to you the other day. We have led really, although our career paths were different, obviously, in terms of our upbringing, we've led really similar lives because my school was bad, not to that extent, but it was bad in that sense because we had a lot of kids from the inner city neighborhoods down here in New Haven. I went to a middle school called East Rock Elementary. And, listen, I try to be a peaceable guy. I hate conflict. I despise it. It's just, there's no use for it.
I do too.
And, it's something to where one day, I mean, I had these bigger kids harassing me, played football outside of school. The type, I mean, they're big. And I carried around, not as a weapon, but I would bring my own lunch. And I had to keep it cold. I would have an ice pack in the front of the lunchbox.
Yeah.
One day I'm by the stairwell and I told the principals, I said, I was legitimately fearful for my safety. And I thought I was scared. I mean, how many people have died, get into a fight, they fall, they hit their head up a staircase. It happens. Yeah. You probably saw it in your patrol years. And so I took out an ice pack because this big football playing kid was about to hammer me. And we were fist fighting. He was getting the better of me. He had a size advantage on me, but I was hanging tough. I just had to grab the ice pack and I whacked him with it. And his nose looked like, like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
Yeah.
And of course, I felt terrible. I felt terrible about it. I started bawling because my thought process as an 11-year-old was, oh my God, what's my mom going to say? And I had to tell, they wanted to charge me. I'm like, well, wait a minute. If I would have fallen and broken some bones, or worse yet, been knocked unconscious or died, then what? But that was the thing. They didn't want to deal with it at that point. And also, you know what? I think they were intimidated by these kids because we had a lot of female teachers, not older, younger, like in their 30s and stuff like that, but they were female. And you're up against these large kids, and these kids don't have any respect nowadays. And it's a dangerous thing. And, you would see it. And it kind of, I don't want to say it embitters you, but it kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, kind of does. Because, for example, uniform, we had a uniform policy. They wouldn't wear the uniform. Every once in a while, I always wear the uniform, but once in a while, you just want to switch it up. You want to wear some clothes that make you feel good. I'd wear clothes. First thing I hear when I come to the cafeteria, first thing in the morning, why are you not wearing your uniform? Like, wait a minute, so it's just stuff like that, when you were saying that, I'm like, wow, that's exactly how, to a similar extent, I grew up. So, upon graduating and finally getting out of there, and we're talking with retired NYPD Bomb Squad Detective Don Sadowy here in the Mike and New Haven podcast. One person's in the live chat. It's Bill Ryan. Bill Ryan's watching us. He says, hello, everyone. Bill, thank you for being here. Appreciate you stopping by. So upon graduating, you didn't enroll in college, and you didn't want to use your automotive industry background to, as you put it, toil away in a factory for like the next 3 decades of your life. And I understand. So you made a leap of faith to enlist in the Marine Corps, and your main inspiration being, who you mentioned earlier, your uncles, both of whom had served in the Army. So it wasn't easy convincing your mother, understandably, I should say, to let you join. But given how important a life decision this was, I mean, when you were thinking about joining the Marines, I mean, how did you convince yourself that this was the right move for you?
At 17, now, taking a step back in time, there were protests, riots in the street, really violent protests and violence against the war in Vietnam. Things were scaling down, but there was this element of violence that was going on around the country. I always felt kind of patriotic, that I love my country, and I would like to do something to serve my country. And I spoke to my uncles about going into the service. But prior to that, I realistically sat back at 17 years old. I was in high school till I was 18 and I graduated. But I started looking at what's the future for me? What are the job prospects for a guy like myself? The economy wasn't really good at that time. As you know, it fluctuates like every 10 years or more.
Right. Yeah.
I had no connections to get a job. I did not want to be an auto mechanic for the rest of my life. I just didn't. Mm-hmm. And quite honestly, I don't think I really had the aptitude for it. Some people get into a vocational training and they find their niche, whether it's being a plumber, a carpenter, auto mechanic. I just sensed this wasn't for me. And my mother and aunt, God bless them, they didn't have the wherewithal. And my grandparents, they were off the boat from Europe, and all they knew was, working in the bar and grill. And my grandfather moved in different circles with people on the waterfront, and I couldn't picture myself being in a factory the rest of my life. There were a lot of factories that were still up and running at that time, all along the waterfront. I just couldn't picture my life being like that. And then I would see many of my uncles and aunts. There were 8 of them. And of course, when my grandparents were alive, for the major holidays, Christmas, Easter, everybody would come to grandma's house. So I get to see my cousins, and I would hear them talk about what they were doing. Mostly my uncles, the men. They were very unhappy in their lives, not with their family, but they felt they were working in jobs they really didn't like, with no future, but they had to put food on the table. They had to pay the bills. And,
Right.
Now that they're older, they're stuck. They're stuck in whatever it was that they were doing. There was a thing called the McCarthy era. And I remember the tail end of it. My uncles had East European sounding names. And during the McCarthy era, if you had an accent from Eastern Europe, if you had a name that was from Eastern Europe, you would they talk about discrimination. I saw this firsthand with my family. They lost jobs.
Simply because of that.
Yeah, because the McCarthy era basically was saying that there's communism here, and it's spreading, and it's going to take over the country, and there's like sleeper cells here, of people who were in our community. I'll just give you.
Just before we continue, just for my listeners that don't know what you're referencing, what he's referencing is Senator Joseph McCarthy, who's one of the more controversial figures in American history. He's the guy that, we've learned about him in history class, but if you haven't, you look him up, he was an idiot. Basically, he held up these papers one day, and this is full, gaslighting at its purest. He said, I know there's 50 communists working in the State Department, and that created this entire scare throughout the country. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want the audience to know.
No, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. I'm just searching my memory as I'm speaking to you about this. I'll just give one example.
Please do.
My one uncle his real name was Kashmir. That's his first name, Kashmir Lenin. Kashmir Lenin. Okay.
And not John Lennon, Joseph Lennon.
Okay. So he unofficially changed his name, and he drove a truck, a delivery truck for Silver Cup Bread in Long Island City, in New York City. Now it's become Silver Cup Studios. It's TV studios. But back in the day, they were one of the biggest producers of bread, regular white bread. And he wore on his navy blue work jacket on his left sleeve, so people could see it when he was driving his truck, an American flag. When he went to church on Sunday, he wore a suit and tie and a hat, and he wore a pin, American flag pin. And this is what I saw go through many of my. I could go on and on about this, but you get the idea. A little bit of irony here. When he passed away many years ago, he was living in New Jersey, and they had his actual name. You go to a funeral parlor for a wake. You go in the lobby, and usually there's somebody there who works there, to direct you, especially if there's more than one wake going on, which there was. Mm-hmm. With 3 or 4 wakes going on that weekend. And we go in, and I see people coming in and asking questions and looking puzzled and almost ready to walk out, because my uncle had his real name posted.
Right.
And he didn't go by that. He went by another name. So people who knew him for the past 20 years of his life, when he, from his 60s to his 80s, when he was retired, they thought they came to the wrong funeral parlor. So that was the irony of that. But that's the atmosphere that I grew up in, and I didn't see any job prospects for myself. And when I talked with my uncles, many of them were World War II veterans, and one of them was a Korean War vet. They were my go-to people. I grew up without a father, as you know, and they were horrified that I was considering going to go in the Marine Corps. Horrified. And they set my young butt down and tried to convince me not to do that. And I listened to them. I didn't interrupt them. I listened to them at length. And I said to them, what do you think my future is going to be living here, staying here? Even though there's a loving family, I don't see any prospects for me, for my future. And I kind of want to prove to myself that I can do this. And when they heard I wanted to go into the Marine Corps, they were like, you're not going to make it. You know, you're not that kind of personality, that type of character that you're not going to make it through boot camp. And that really hit me hard. I went and I used to go to talk to the recruiters twice a week. They were realistic and very encouraging. And they told me how to train physically to get ready for this. And told me this will be the hardest thing you'll ever do in your life. And when I look back, it probably ranks as one of the toughest things I've ever done. Now, it's not all about push-ups and doing 5-mile runs and, you know, shooting rifles and so forth.
Right.
They psychologically, they break you down. They beat you up verbally and psychologically. And the point was to break you down, to build you up. You're no longer an individual. You're part of a unit. You're part of a unit that looks, acts, thinks together as one. You're part of a team. And my uncles didn't want me to do it. My mother didn't want me to do it. And finally, I went to the recruiter and I told him, I said, this is what I want to do, but my family's totally against it. So he said to me, do you think it would help if I talked to them? I said, yeah. I says, look, you're a Vietnam vet. You're a gunnery sergeant. You got like 14, 15 years in. My uncles are veterans from World War II. I says, could you talk to them on my behalf? They came to the house, to my mother's apartment. All my uncles were there with my mother. And the recruiter said to me, you need to leave the house. And I left for like over an hour. And then I sat outside. And he came down afterwards. And he said, I think I spoke on your behalf, thinking about your future, what you really want to do. And he says, they're gonna give you their blessing. I needed my mother to sign the papers because I wanted to be sworn in at 17. I think at the time was the only service that allowed a 17-year-old to go be sworn in, with the promise that I would finish and graduate high school. But she had to sign the papers, and she did. And
Changed your life.
It did. Now I'm nowhere in the shape I was back then, but it shaped my character and my personality for the rest of my life. You know, it gave me a moral compass. It reinforced my patriotism. It gave me a sense of service, of being part of a team, being part of something bigger than yourself, and being grateful for that. And it's not about putting money in your pocket. It's about doing the right thing for people who maybe are too weak to defend themselves or protect themselves. And that stayed with me the rest of my life.
Talking with retired NYPD Bomb Squad Detective Don Sadowy here on the Mike the Naven podcast. We are live here on YouTube, and you can find us in every audio platform as well as on YouTube. MC audio, MC apostrophe S audio. So, you know, I imagine then going through the Marine Corps, I mean, you must have, we'll talk about the police academy and the NYPD years a little bit later, but compared to the Marine Corps, the police academy must have been a walk in the park.
It was. I was still in top physical shape. I will be very honest. I found, you know, I never got encouragement to go to college. And that's not because of me. They didn't have the wherewithal, you know. They were kind of stuck in that time warp from the 1950s, you know. You went, you got a job, you got married, you had kids, you know, and listen, you could get a job in a factory down on the waterfront, you know, and, you know, as a young guy, you know, you live for the weekend, to go to the bar, you know, cheer on your favorite sports team, you know, and, you know, date some of the local girls and stuff like that, hang out with your buddies, you know.
Yeah, of course.
And I
Bachelor's life.
wanted more than that. I wanted more than that.
So, before we continue on with your Marines tenure, this is again, I talked earlier about old New York in regards to the bookies and whatnot. This is just not just old New York, but this is old society. You don't really see stories like this anymore. And that's the story of you and your wife. Because, like I said, it's old school. It's just, for lack of a better way to put it, it's just a very cute story. You guys have known each other for a while, growing up together around each other. You ran the same circles and then began dating, to which 3 days after the first date, you proposed. You had talked a lot about, you guys had talked to each other a ton over the course of those 3 days. So, you got a better sense of what she was about, and she got a better sense of what what you were about. But nonetheless, 3 days, if the Marine Corps scared your mom, imagine this, this news. So anyway, that being said, you mentioned feeling a sense of urgency in your book. So over the course of conversing with her, I should say, when was the moment you knew, yeah, this is the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with?
We had known each other as friends for many years. Since I think that we were like 12 years old. We were in the same circle of neighborhood kids. And, at that time, it's very awkward, for boys and girls. Girls mature faster than boys.
Yes.
Looking back. We didn't date each other, but we were just friends. Just friends. And over a period of time, not just her, but, other boys and girls, you get to know each other. You get a kind of a sense of, where people's heads are at, The group I hung out with, we weren't into smoking pot. We weren't into getting blind-ass staggering drunk on a Friday night, which you got it. Somebody's older brother would go buy liquor or something. We weren't into that. We weren't into that. There was a local priest, an Episcopal priest, who thought that it wasn't good for us to hang out on street corners. So he would invite us, over to the church, and he would let us watch TV. He knew some of the kids in the group didn't have a very, trying to find the right word here,
stable
family life at home. And he knew some of the kids were hungry. So he got some of the monks that used to come over to the church with him through whatever aspects of things. And they used to make on Friday night big pots of spaghetti and meatballs and Italian bread and soda. And, I never thought about it back then, but that was like really kind of them reaching out to the neighborhood kids. And then we watched TV. Saturday night, he would think of a movie that was coming out, and sometimes controversial. Not now, but at the time.
At
the time, I remember this. There was a movie called Easy Rider with Peter Fonda and Jack Nicholson and a bunch of other people who became very famous. And it was about these guys on motorcycles transporting drugs and their experiences. And he got us to go to the movie with him, a whole bunch of us, on like Saturday night, local neighborhood theater. And then the next day, he'd invite us, after church. And you didn't have to be the same denomination. And that was radical at the time, because it sounds funny to say this, but Catholic kids didn't hang out with a Protestant priest.
Sounds like Ireland.
Yeah.
Troubles.
And to say that to your parents, forget about it. Anyway, he would have us hang out with him and say, "What do you think of that movie?" And he wasn't trying to guide the conversation. He wanted us to talk about it. What do you think was good? What do you think wasn't good in that? And he got us to think for ourselves. And that was really good. And Kathy was there with me during a lot of that, along with other boys and girls. when I came home on leave, I was gone for 2 years from when I first went in. So when I came home, I was getting ready to be shipped overseas to the 3rd Marine Division.
Mhm.
Things were still popping, not open war, but things were still unstable in Southeast Asia. And I will tell you, I was a bit frightened, but I knew I would do my duty. But I was going to ship out for 13 months. Now there's nothing like, the only way to communicate back then was to write a letter, and depending where you were, what unit, what ship you were on, where you were being constantly moved around in the Pacific, it took about 14 to maybe 20 days for Kathy to get a letter from me, and vice versa. You know, we didn't have all the technology we have today.
Right.
And you were gone for 13 months. I was living on sea rations, which is like non-perishable food in a box less than the size of a shoebox. And I was okay with it. But I knew it should be okay, but there's a chance I could be going into harm's way. And there was a sense of urgency. And I told her how I felt. And one of the things I really loved about her was it wasn't any of these attitudes and mind games. You know, I got to figure out how you're feeling, why you're feeling. No, there was none of that. Everything was just up in front. She told me how she felt, what she thought, what she wanted in life, what she was hoping for. And we were on the same page. We really were. And I fell in love with her. And I said, look, and I said what I said. And I said, let's see if we still feel the same way after I come home after 13 months. Because a lot of girls would not wait 13 months. There was other girls that I knew, and they used to say, oh, I would never wait for somebody for a couple of years, because I was in for 4 years, and, I didn't know how it would work out. But when I came home, I was afraid she didn't feel the same way. She was afraid I felt that way too. And we didn't. And her father was former Marine. And, it all kind of came together. And we're still together after all these years.
Exactly. So the rest, as they say, is history. A quick nod to the live chat again. Briefly stopping by was Bill Cannon, retired NYPD Homicide Sergeant Bill Cannon of the Police Off the Cuff podcast, which is the podcast I mentioned to you off the air before.
I got to give him a call.
Yeah. Sergeant Cannon, if you're still watching, you'll get a call from Detective Sadowy soon, and you will not regret talking with him, believe me. So, you returned, and she was willing to wait. And then, of course, then came the few years that you were working at the UN. And how you got the UN job is pretty interesting, because the city was going through a fiscal crisis in the mid 1970s. So you couldn't even, you took the NYPD test in 77, but you didn't get called until 80, which we'll discuss momentarily. But you're literally walking down the street. A couple of guys working security at the front door of the UN, and correct me if I'm not telling the story all the way.
You're on track.
So they see your posture, because if you ever seen anybody that was in the military, they walk a certain way. They're very well trained, especially those in the Marine Corps, and so there's a certain posture to them that they're taught to carry themselves with. These guys notice you walking well like a Marine, so they literally say, "Hey, come over here," and from there you end up getting a job guarding a man that at the time was the UN Secretary General, only the fourth in the UN's history, and would later be the future president of Austria, a gentleman by the name of Kurt Waldheim. So take me through, first, before we talk about your relationship with Mr. Waldheim, getting that job.
This is going to sound really corny, but I think I'm not a holy roller, but I believe in God. I have very strong faith. especially after a number of things that have happened to me in my life. I've always felt blessed that God was kind of looking out for me. And it was a beautiful day out, sunny day, brisk, kind of breezy. I had gone down to Federal Plaza to file for taking the exam for U.S. Border Patrol. Now, if you recall, from 1975, I got out of the Corps in 76. From 1975 to 1980, major layoffs. First time in the history of New York City. The economy was tanked, as it does periodically.
Yes.
There was no jobs, nowhere, no how, with a future. I had just gotten out of the Marine Corps, and I remember somebody telling me that they were going to look to hire guys for the U.S. Border Patrol, but you got to file for the test. You got to take a test. You got to get on the list, and you got to go through that litany process. So I went down to 26 Federal Plaza back then, and I filed for the test, and I took the subway halfway back up the east side, and I decided it was such a beautiful day. I'm getting off the subway, and I'm going to walk up the east side of Manhattan. It's, I'm right out of the Marine Corps, and just kind of thrilled to be back home again, taking the sights in. It's a beautiful day. And I'm walking, taking a full 36-inch step. I still got a high and tight haircut. I got no waist, and here I am marching up First Avenue. And I'm walking by the UN. And it's an impressive compound. It's 16 and a half acres, 3.5 levels below ground. It's impressive. And these uniform officers that were there called me over, and we struck up a conversation. And I didn't know poop from pound cake, keeping it clean, Mike.
Appreciate that. Thank you. I don't have to edit anything out.
And they said, go across the street. We're looking, we like to get, former military guys, for UN security. And I said, wow. I says, that's an idea, because now I'm thinking, if I get the job, the Border Patrol, I'm going to be going down to some little border town, probably just bringing my wife down there. And it's not the best of circumstances, starting out a marriage like that. And then I find out the pay was significantly more, and that they had a pension plan and benefits and everything. So I go across the street to the UN. They call it the UNDC building. It's a big green tinted building right across the street. And they have a recruiting office there up on the 3rd floor. And I go up, and it's maybe 10:30 in the morning. And I go up there, and there's hardly anybody there. And this gentleman dressed to the tens in a beautiful suit sees me, and he's coming out to get a cup of coffee. And I'm in the waiting room, and again, I don't know who to see, who to talk to. And he sees me sitting there, and I guess I looked puzzled. And he said in his very heavy French accent, and his name was Mr. Dusson, and he's French Canadian. And he said to me, young man, may I help you? I said, yeah. I says, I'm right out of the service. I talked to some guys across the street, and they sent me over here, and I wanted to find out about getting an application and maybe getting an interview to come into UN security. And I was dressed very neatly. I mean, I used to iron my dungarees. They had a crease in them. My shirt was pressed. I wore a nice kind of jacket, sport jacket, highly shined shoes. But I was dressed very casual. And he said to me, he says, they're very formal here. He says, hold on. He says, I'll get you an application. He says, but I'll be very honest with you. you really need to come back for an interview, but you need to be wearing a suit and tie. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. Obviously I don't know these things. I'm naive.
You do. Yeah.
So he gives me the application, and he wishes me well. And I think that was the last time he thought he'd see me. At 2:30 in the afternoon, I come walking back up there in my Sunday best, in a conservative suit and tie, highly shined shoes, with the application completely filled out. And I don't see him. I see some receptionist and then somebody's secretary, and they take the application and they said, hold on, stay here for a little bit. We'll bring this to somebody. And about 20 minutes later, the lady comes out and says, Mr. Sadowy, she says, would you be agreeable to being interviewed right now for this application? I says, absolutely. So I'm brought into this grand office. It really was grand. And the person that's going to interview me has my application. He was reading it. And he turns around in the chair when his secretary brings me in. It's this Frenchman, French-Canadian, Mr. Toussaint. He says, I have to tell you, I didn't think I'd see you again. He says, but I'm
At least he was honest.
I'm sorry?
At least he was honest.
Yeah. He says, but I'm very impressed that you took my words so seriously and you come back the same day in a suit and tie. You must really want this job. I said, I really do. I really do. And the rest was history. I went into it and I was trained. I worked around the clock. I worked within the compound. I worked outside of the compound. I did all kind of assignments. It was, I think, when I look back, one of the more interesting times in my life, because it opened my eyes to what was happening in the world, which was very turbulent at that time. 1977 and 1980. It was just one thing after another. I got to be within arm's reach of people who were heads of state, foreign ministers, dictators, presidents. More importantly, I got to kind of be like a fly on a wall to history, to hear what real negotiations go on. When the cameras go on in the Security Council, in the floor of the Security Council or the General Assembly, I would call it almost theater, because they're playing to the folks back home. Everything that they say, their gestures, their mannerisms, that's all political. That's going to play for back home. The real negotiations happen in the corridors and the Diplomats North Lounge, which overlooks this beautiful, huge garden outside with huge picture windows. And all negotiations started over a glass of scotch with everybody, Back then, diplomats were big drinkers, and they would sit in these big, low slung leather chairs with low tables in these lounges. And that's where a lot of the real diplomacy was carried out. It wasn't what we saw on television, in the evening news, conflict in the Middle East. General Assembly calls the Security Council into negotiations. Yeah, but the real stuff was done outside of the chamber, which I made note of in the book with a couple of meetings and so forth. It opened my eyes to the world. Coming out of 4 years in the Marine Corps, and again, I was a shy kid coming out of high school.
Right.
the world was black and white. When you're a Marine, the world is black and white. And maybe that's how it should be for a Marine, because you're going to be called, you may be called upon to do some really extenuating things. And you got to be there for each other. So I understand that. But when I got to the UN, I realized the world's not in black and white. One of the things that I learned after I was there for a while, I'm a curious person by nature.
As am I.
And I was told in the cafeteria, everybody goes to the cafeteria. Not everybody goes to eat lunch at the delegates' dining room, which, by the way, is the same food, except it's a lot fancier and a lot more expensive. Okay. And there's a bar. There's a bar up there. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So of course, I'm saving my money. I want to get married. I wasn't married at the time, and saving my money, me and Kathy. And I remember some people whispering to me, like, I got my tray of food. It's a big, beautiful cafeteria. And there's like picture windows that look out over the East River, that look south, nice views.
Right.
Oh, Don, don't go over and sit at those tables. Why not? Oh, the Russians are there. You don't want to sit at those tables. Me being me, by the time
Mikhail Gorbachev, how do you do?
before I got out of the Marine Corps, I was my own man.
Right.
I had formed my personality and my character, and I was secure in that, as I have been most of my life. But the foundation was the Marine Corps. I walk square in front of God and everybody. I take my tray, I walk right over to the middle of these two long tables, and I ask if I could sit down politely. And these Russians, like, who are you? I said, and I sat down. I didn't wait to be invited. I sat down right in the thick of them, in front of God and everybody. Mm. And I introduced myself. What are you doing here? Why are you sitting here with us? Very, very cut and dry, very gruff. I says, well, I thought I would come over and ask if I can break bread with you folks, because I was told not to. What? I said, yeah, people told me not to sit here because you guys are Russians. You're Russian diplomats. And they started jabbering in Russian. And I said, the reason I wanted to come over, I says, I'm curious about you. I'm an American, obviously. I said, I watch the television and read the papers. And I said, they paint you all as bad people. Oh, it was like sticking them in the butt with a pin. What? And I said, I would like to get to meet you and ask you about your country, your culture, if that's all right. If not, I'll pick up my tray and I'll leave. They started jabbering in Russian. And this woman, I'm going to say in her late 50s, Russian woman, blonde, with short hair. She said, no, please stay. Please stay. She says, and this opened up a dialogue about the people of Russia, about us here in the United States. And I says, I realize I'm being spoon-fed. Whatever the producers of a particular radio station or a TV station or the newspapers, what spin they want to put on things. So I would like to hear from you. She introduced me to like everybody. And when I worked 4 to 12, she was the head of the Russian typing pool. Her husband was third secretary to the Russian ambassador to the UN. And when she worked 4 to 12, we would sit and have dinner together and just chat. And it wasn't like anybody was trying to recruit me or anything like that. I came in just very naive and honest, and she picked up on it and introduced me to a lot of people. I made friends with as many people as I could. I made friends with the Muslims from the Middle East. I made friends from Africa. To this day, I'm still in contact with some of my African friends who were retired.
Mm-hmm.
There's a funny story, I'm not going to say it, about learning some phrases, some African phrases. So I don't want to give that away.
Yeah. That's
but
fine.
it actually, that story followed me when I went into the NYPD, which you know, but don't give that away.
No, I won't.
A little teaser for anybody who's considering buying my book. I decided that I live locally, but I think globally. And it really opened my mind to thinking about world politics. Then when I became a bodyguard to the Secretary General at the time, I was in his residence as he was having private meetings with people, or in his outer office. And I mean, we're talking about major events that were going on in the world. You know, so I kind of describe myself, I think I mentioned it in the book, I felt like a fly on a wall to history. I'm in the room with these leaders and representatives, and I'm overhearing private conversations. By the way, I had to swear to and sign a very long document in triplicate that I would not reveal the conversations that I was privy to during my time of service at the UN. It was a legal document, very similar to like if you have a government clearance today with the U.S. government, that you won't reveal anything that you learn. You
take it to your grave, basically.
I'm sorry.
You take it to your grave, basically.
Well, not quite. When you're retired or you move on, some of the things I talk about in my book, as you know, I had 3 government clearances with 3 agencies. Mm-hmm. I had to go to those agencies to ask permission if I could discuss certain things. Certain things I couldn't. So we had to change the manuscript up a couple of times. And Jeff Ingber, God bless him, he's great. Yes. I'll tell you, that was another time I really feel blessed by God. I didn't actually meet him. A gentleman named Joe Connor wanted to do a book about the murder of his father called Shattered Lives. It's about the FALN bombing, William Morales bombing Francis Tavern, which is a very historical place where George Washington said goodbye to his troops. They contacted a gentleman named Rick Hahn, who was an FBI agent, and then he was my group supervisor. And I will tell you, I had my confrontations with the FBI. Many people do. But that aside, Rick Hahn, we became very close. You know, sometimes you meet somebody professionally and yeah, you work together, but your personalities click. And that's what happened with us. So now, decades later, I'm getting ahead of myself. We're all retired, and he gives me a call. Hey, Don, what are you doing? I'm retired. I'm just taking care of some afflictions that I have, and just dealing with life, spend some time finally with my family. And listen, this guy approached me, and we're pulling a team together to do research for a book. And I never did anything like that. And I really enjoyed it. It was like working with former investigators that you work with. And it was kind of like working a cold case is the best way I can explain it. But Jeff Ingber, I can't say enough good things about this man. And he's interesting in his own right. So I'm sorry, I kind of got off track there.
Don, like I told you before, whichever guest comes on the show, they drive the car. So whatever avenue you want to travel down, if you want to jump centuries ahead, decades ahead, I don't care.
No. I want to stay on track with your
Well, I
question.
appreciate that, but I don't mind. We're not strict here. So I do want to ask you about this Kurt Waldheim. And before I get into Kurt Waldheim, just a quick note for those of you that don't know who the FALN is. They were, and I can say this because I'm half Puerto Rican in addition to being half Dominican Rican. They were a terrorist group from Puerto Rico. Their FALN stands for Fuerzas Armadas para la Liberación Nacional de Puerto Rico. I think something like that.
I got to interrupt you. That was very good with no accent.
Thank you.
I'm teasing.
I know. I caught the drift there.
It was very good.
Thank you. My Spanish is.
I would have butchered that.
My Spanish has come a long way. I learned. I had to relearn it. I spoke it when I was a baby. When I was a toddler, I spoke. That was the only language I spoke. I lost it. Got it back when I was 7, 8 years old. So it's about 75% of the way back.
I got to interrupt you for a second. This just rang a bell for me. Remember I was telling you about the McCarthy era?
Yes.
When I was really young, my grandparents started teaching me other languages from Europe, where they grew up. And there was a big argument in the family when I started school, because I started picking that up. And that's the best time to pick up a language, is when you're young, as you know. I got reamed out by my mother and a couple of other relatives arguing with my grandparents. My mother never argued with my grandparents. It was just, you don't do that. He said, you have to stop this. Again, I'm going back to the McCarthy era. How's he going to get a good job? Who's going to hire him if he speaks the language? They hate us. Nobody wants to give anybody any help if they think you're from Eastern Europe or Central Europe at that time. And if you speak the language, never mind an accent, this kid will never get ahead. That put the kibosh on me learning any of the languages from my grandparents, which I kind of regret to this day, but I understand why.
It was a product of the time. And I same thing with, for me here, my late great grandmother, she's been gone about a decade now. She lived a long life though. She was 83. Miss her a lot, but she, the reason she could understand English, and but she could not answer you back in it. Right. And she'd been here a long time. So the reason I wanted to learn Spanish, ironically enough, one of the main reasons at least, was because I wanted to communicate with her better. Because I spoke Spanglish, it was broken Spanish for me and her broken English, and we made it work. But that's the reason why I was able to get it. And it's somebody has a great joke. My buddy Mark DeMeo, who's been on this podcast before, and I mentioned him earlier. He's half Dominican, half Czech. Now there's a mix, and he says, I know enough Spanish to pick up a date. So, in that sense, it works. It's a good line. He's a comedian, so he can come up with those great lines. Shout out to Mark if you're watching, pal. But I do want to.
That's great.
It is. So that I clarified, like I said, who the FALN was, and they conducted numerous bombings throughout New York in the 70s and 80s, including one that we'll talk about a little later. Gravely injured, and nearly killed 3 police officers in New York, including 2 members of the bomb squad. So you worked with Kurt Waldheim, guarding him for a few years, and Kurt Waldheim in history. He passed away in 2007 at the age of 89. He is a very controversial figure, to say the least. There's a lot of different stories, either way, positive and negative, about Kurt Waldheim. I mentioned he was a Secretary General of the UN. He went on to be president of Austria from 1986 to 1992, I believe. Yeah. And he had some links to the war crimes that were being committed by the Nazis in Germany. At the very minimum, I'm not accusing him of partaking. I don't know. I don't want to accuse somebody when they're not allowed to defend themselves. But at the very minimum, it was said that he at least had knowledge of these horrible things that were taking place. But nonetheless, you didn't know any of that, and you worked with him, guarding him for 3 years. I mean, I don't know how else to ask this question. Take me through what your relationship was like with him, because there's so many layers there.
I'm not going to give it away, because I think.
All right, yeah, that's fine.
No. Let me just preface what I'm going to say. There's an interesting interview on me becoming a member of his bodyguard detail, his personal detail, and to work not only with him at the UN, but outside of the UN, at the residence, and it entailed a lot. And he didn't conduct the interview. The person who ran everything behind the scenes, no, he conducted everything at the UN.
Right.
Okay. He was like considered the rank of like a head of state. Mm-hmm. So he ran the administration with that. But everything at home, everything socially, was administered by his wife. So I was selected and asked, would I be interested in being part of the detail? I didn't initially say, hey, boss, I want to be in the bodyguard detail. No, it didn't happen that way. It didn't happen that way.
Right.
I was discreetly asked, would I want to consider being part of that detail? And there was a good friend of mine who got into the detail before me, Nick Panzerino, who was in the book, and he's got some interesting comments about Waldheim and his family, which I'm not going to give that away. But the interview was extremely interesting. So I'm going to leave that as a teaser. Okay. Working for him, he was very much a formal person, except when he was home. When he got home, he'd take his jacket off, loosen his tie, sit down and talk. There were times he talked with us. He treated all of us very, very well. Never spoke down to us in any way. Would ask us about our families and so forth, which I thought was interesting. But his wife basically ran the show at home, everything off duty, vacations, things like that. Again, it was one of the most interesting times of my life, and all the movers and shakers and diplomats and people would come for dinner, and then they'd go upstairs to the library, and they'd have coffee, and they would talk. And where's Sadowy? I'm just outside of the room in the hallway. I'm not there to eavesdrop. I'm there for security purposes. Why would I say that? You had people that would come there that were armed, and that was frowned upon. The only person who was allowed, that Kurt Waldheim allowed to be armed, because the guy, and rightfully so, was very worried about his own personal safety, was Yasser Arafat. Yasser Arafat carried a Browning high-power 9mm pistol underneath his jacket in a holster. And he wouldn't give that up to nobody, not even the U.S. State Department. That wasn't happening. So, there were reasons. I would
of course.
Issue. Now, this is just my opinion, okay? And you may speak to Jeff about this. And again, one of the things I learned in the UN is that we can agree to disagree. We could break bread together. We can socialize together. You may be on the opposite end of things that I believe, but I respect you for it. And that was one of the most important things that I learned working at the UN in 3.5 years. We could be on opposite sides of the fence. I made friends with dozens of people. And no, we didn't agree on everything. We did not. But we were polite about it. I learned from being in a diplomatic environment You don't have to act like you're the smartest man in the room and pound your fist to get your point across. You could speak softly, and you'll make your point. They'll make their counterpoint. But at the end of it, we could still be friends.
Right.
So that's a big thing that I took away. So with that said,